is part of lowering your risk of fire danger and lowering all the variables that we call climate change. So climate change isn't just about carbon, it's also about water vapor and these other gases, methane and nitrous oxide, and it's a whole system. So we're trying to get the system back in balance. And so maybe the ground cover you pick isn't a carbon powerhouse, but it might have these other co-benefits for pollination or for moisture retention that are equally important.
Yes, I'll just real quick.
Just real quick, I touched on this in the talk, and in the research that I've done, and I'm no expert on mycorrhizae, okay? But there's a type of mycorrhizae that inhabits most of the grassland, desert, coastal sage scrub type communities, which is called arbuscular mycorrhizae or endomycorrhizae. And I've seen repeatedly reference that endomycorrhizae sequesters 27% of the world's carbon production in the form of glomalin, which is they form little tubules, the mycelia, through the soil to transport the sugars and minerals and water. And those get sloughed off but left behind in the soil, and they're carbon compound or organic compounds, organic polymers. And so, like I said, I'm no expert, but I would imagine that plants that are of that group, like Baccharis, Eriogonum, Salvias, Artemisia, which also I think might be C4, I'm not sure, but anyway, those might, I would think, and remember also that the mycorrhizal volume, the biomass, is many times that of the individual root systems of the plants. It's a tremendous amount of biomass that permeates the upper 3 feet of soil. So I would think things that support that kind of ecology are probably pretty damn good carbon sequestering plants that don't necessarily have to be huge trees. So.
Good ground covers also hold steep hills. Sorry, hold what?
So the comment was that good ground covers also hold steep hills.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. A bunch of questions that fall into two categories. One set is of what an individual can do to begin to transform a piece of land that maybe has had another use into a thriving wildlife habitat sanctuary. And the related one is if you don't have a half acre or it's a very small space, what contribution can you make? I think that we've had some answers already. I think Patricia gave us the example of the map of San Francisco. Your one particular garden may not by itself be significant, but if it's connected or close enough to a lot of other neighboring patches, it can be great. And then of course here in Marin, we also have open space areas that may be close enough to your garden to provide the inoculum for native wildlife to come in. And then as far as the transformation of where do you start? I think maybe Greg gave us some suggestions, but maybe if anybody has any further information to add on those things.
I mean, I would say always start by listening, and I mean like really listening to the land, listen to what it wants, not just assume like, oh, well, it wants to be this or that, but sit with it, like listen to the land, listen to the wind. What is the wind doing? I think in the permaculture principle, they always say like, observe your land for a whole year so that you can see it through all of the seasons and see what's happening, see what are the species that are already coming, are there migratory birds passing through there in the spring that maybe you're not seeing in the winter, but you have to notice that so you know that this tree, although maybe it doesn't seem like it belongs there, but it's creating habitat. Or maybe there is a water stream that only reveals itself in the winter. So I think taking the time to know your land, to listen with all of your, feel it with all of your senses, and have your approach come from that place of having heard what it wants. And then you can decide, okay, like I think this is the best approach to go with this. and maybe it doesn't quite fit what your idea of what you wanted it for this place, right? But it is what's best for the land. Anybody?
I would say be brave. I was just thinking of a friend of ours that lives in Carmichael, and he lives on a cul-de-sac where every single house has a front lawn in front of it, all the way down. And when he and his family moved in, they tore up the lawn, they planted a variety of fruit trees, they sheet mulched the whole thing, they put in blueberries, they put in peaches, they put in, you name it. And it stuck out like a sore thumb, and all the neighbors came and said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm planting fruit trees." And sure enough, the fruit trees attracted beneficials, it created shade, and all the neighborhood kids would come over and get the peaches and the plums and the jujubes and all the wild stuff that they're growing. And then the next neighbor decides, well, maybe I can plant one tree in my lawn. But sometimes, you just have to go against the grain and say, like, I'm going to listen to the land, but I'm also going to do something that I know is right, but might not be popular aesthetically.
And I can share, be patient and know that mistakes might happen, but then we learn from those mistakes to move forward and create something even better.
And I'd like to add that a landscape is a little bit like this conference in that it's a conversation between you and the land. And this conference will present all kinds of fun things up here that are what we understand them to be now. But just like fire safe plant lists, they may not be relevant or particularly useful now, but research will be ongoing. And those truths that we're talking about today may change. So just keep an open mind about the fact that our knowledge today is imperfect, and as we move forward, the landscape that we're sitting on in terms of fire is changing with us.
I think it's well said, actually.
Could I add something to that? There's a movie called The Biggest Little Farm, I think is the name of it. If you haven't seen it, watch it. There's a lot of good information in that in terms of like what can happen, what you can do with a piece of property that the water runs off of has been conventionally farmed.
If you have a lot of money.
Well, no, not even that. You can move into a place that's just bare earth. But the other thing I want to say is we're looking at all of it. We're so damn human-centric, period. Everything we're doing, whether we're going to buy ourselves a new Tesla or whether we're going to ride a bicycle or whatever it is, we're still human-centric, and we're leaving out 99.9% of whatever life has been on this planet forever. And we're pretty out of balance. So yeah, listen to the land and all that, but still underneath it all, we're still being driven by money and our desires, and we want to, like, we drive here, for example, how much carbon is in us driving around and buying all this stuff, and just in our Amazon boxes we throw out week after week. It's like, we don't even look at that stuff. It's just human-centric. And I'd say start with try and look at things, try to grow down a bit. Look at kids. Why do we stop like wearing fairy costumes and climbing trees? Seriously, it's because we kind of worry about what other people think rather than going out and rolling around on the ground or just feeling and exploring. Go out and explore and just see what comes. And check out The Biggest Little Farm. It really is a lot of good information in there.
Did that get caught on the camera?
What's that?
Did that get caught? Or did we need to paraphrase that?
I'm not sure how much the microphone will pick it up from back here, but probably some of it.
There's also a
check out the Little
book
Biggest
out
Farm.
right
Yeah.
now called Nature's Best Hope by Doug Callamy, the entomologist from University of Delaware, telling people to plant natives in their gardens in order to have a bigger ecosystem than we have in the natural world to help the insect apocalypse and the bird decline.
And one last.
I really recommend that book. What's the name? Nature's Best Hope by Doug Callamy, Tallamy.
I was going to say one more thing that you can start today, and that's your compost. So start your compost at home, build your own soils. If all of a sudden you now have this beautiful piece of land that you're going to be stewarding, build your own soil, get to know your soil and like build that, because we can do this. We don't need to bring it from other places. It's right at our fingertips to do it.
And even the water that we use, it's all pumped around with electricity. It's like we pump it through the drip or through the whatever, but personally I think there's value in using our water for attracting bees or feeding wildlife, for example, than doing a lot.
Okay, yeah, thanks. There's a very interesting set of questions that may be the perfect questions to end on. And these are related to how do we scale up from my individual house or garden to the neighborhood level. So how do we coordinate? We've already seen some great examples with CERT, I think, here in Marin, and with Fire Safe neighborhoods. But are there ecologically sustainable neighborhood mechanisms that we can work towards? Are there grants that neighborhoods can apply for so that they can actually restore their local environments using many of the techniques that have been discussed here? Does anybody know of any of those mechanisms or resources?
Great question.
So for this, there's a whole series that UC has online called Forest Stewardship Workshops. Now you may not have a patch of forest, but what this is oriented toward is the small landowner who owns, say, half an acre to 5 acres to 10 acres of forest land and doesn't really understand how they can